911, what's your emergency?
My sister is missing. She wasn't in her room or anywhere. No one has heard from her.
Okay, sir, I understand your concern. What's her name? What does she look like?
Her name is Margaret Kilcoyne, red hair, 50 years old.
I'm dispatching an officer to your location right now.
Dr. Margaret Kilcoyne was never seen again.
There was something obviously going on, and really clear that somebody was looking for somebody, and they were looking pretty hard.
There was a couple hundred people had come out there to help search the area again. I think if you layer her possible manic depression, it really adds a lot of crazy possibilities to the whole story. That part of it is what makes it really difficult to figure out what might have happened. It just adds too many possibilities.
Margaret Mary Kilcoyne was born in 1930 and grew up in Worcester, Mass. Her parents, Margaret Lynch and Patrick Kilcoyne, had emigrated from Ireland. She had 3 brothers and was closest with her younger brother, Lawrence, also known as Leo. Margaret was a religious person raised in the Catholic faith. She received a bachelor's degree from Boston University and in 1964 was among the first women to receive a medical degree from the University of Vermont. She lived in New York City and owned a house in the Tom Nevers area of Nantucket, which she visited frequently throughout the year. Margaret was 5 foot and 9 inches tall and slender at 140 pounds. She had reddish hair and blue eyes. She never married or had children and had few close friends. She liked to take long walks, sail her sunfish in the harbor, and was an accomplished tennis player. She has been described as a loner. However, people who knew her also said she was upbeat, ebullient, and often smiling. After college, Margaret joined the staff of Columbia's College of Physicians and Surgeons in New York as a specialist in clinical work on the effects of hypertension in adolescents. In 1980, she had a breakthrough in her research that she believed was Nobel Prize worthy. Margaret and her research partner, Dr. Earl Zimmerman, were planning to present a paper on their discovery at a prominent medical conference that May in New Orleans. On her way to Nantucket to celebrate her discovery, Margaret approaches a woman in a parking lot in Rye, New York, and tells her she's a nervous wreck, can't drive anymore, and that she needs some help finding a hotel. The woman, concerned, takes her to a nearby hotel where Margaret offers to buy her dinner and brings up her breakthrough medical discovery. She tells the woman that she has 3 homes, Nantucket, New York, and one in Boston. The hotel is booked solid, so the woman offers to let Margaret stay at her apartment for the night. Early the next morning, Margaret is gone, heading for the island, and the woman finds a note thanking her. From Nantucket, Margaret called her brother Leo in Toronto, telling him she needs guidance.
I would stay at Columbia however long it is possible for them to understand that my work is so important and steps need to be taken to ensure that I can be creatively left alone. He said if you are sitting on Nobel Prize material, there is no department chairman in the world that is going to let you go. I said that I have to emphasize that it is not the decision of the chairman whether I have to go or will go. And I said total silence from everybody. And if that is understood and that is possible, then that will happen. I will remain as long as it is mutually beneficial. I immediately knew that I was definitely in a new plane of spiritual existence, and I didn't have any foggy idea what the boundaries were, but I certainly knew by now that it was still the same old rule: don't try to play God.
After the 90-minute phone call, which Margaret taped, Leo quickly decided to come to Nantucket to convince her to get help. This conversation weighed heavily on Leo, who was already worried about his sister's mental state and her work-life balance. That afternoon, a friend and neighbor of hers, Don Smith, notices that she's home and stops in on his way home from work. During a rambling 3-hour conversation, Margaret tells him, "I have wonderful news from God." She also made a comment about jumping off the Empire State Building if God had told her to. Don felt relieved that Leo was coming to Nantucket.
Having the transcript is key in terms of being able to posthumously diagnose or postulate what might Margaret have been suffering from. She does seem as though she could well have had bipolar disorder, manic depression. She had a baseline that was hypomanic, where she was always energetic and interacting with people, and yet she was also considered a loner. She didn't have many friends, and so it's an interesting juxtaposition. It doesn't appear that she was diagnosed or treated before she disappeared, although it does appear that both she and her brother, Leo, knew that there were symptoms and referred to those symptoms, which are hallucinations, flight of ideas. She talks about whether you might think I'm crazy or spaced out, these kinds of things. And so Leo, I think, is not revealing to her that he's actively worried in that call. And he had made an appointment for her to see a psychiatrist, I believe, the very next day.
Margaret goes shopping at the A&P and buys everything in sets of 3s. She tells people that she's going to be having a big party, and she's buying provisions for the 3 houses her guests will be staying in. She spends $650 on groceries and $250 on alcohol, equivalent to about $3,300 today. Instead of the big celebration she was talking about, she and her brother have a small dinner with close friends Dick and Grace Coffin. According to Leo, during the dinner he had to beg Margaret to be quiet as she was talking so much that no one else could join in the conversation. The Coffins leave around 10:30 and Margaret goes to bed soon after. She sets her alarm for 6 a.m. so that she can go to an early mass at St. Mary's Church in town. When Leo goes to wake her up, he finds her bedroom empty. Her winter coat is in the closet along with her winter boots and purse, despite the bitter cold temperatures. Margaret Mary Kilcoyne was never seen again. Newly appointed police chief Paul Hunter arrives on Nantucket from Maine several hours after Margaret had been reported missing. He is briefed by a junior officer who tells him a woman was apparently suffering some nervous problems and perhaps had snapped during the night. Chief Hunter appoints Captain George Resendes of the Nantucket Police Department to lead the investigation. There are about 50 people looking for her across the southeast corner of the island. Searchers include public safety officials from the police and fire departments, the Coast Guard, and many volunteers. 2 helicopters were sent over from the Cape to search from the air. For 2 days, they searched the entire east end of the island on foot, checking unoccupied houses and even sending divers into frozen Tom Nevers Pond before the effort was called off on January 28th.
Every once in a while, there'd be a car go whipping down. Later, we were driving to town, and there were people standing on the bike path, and there were cars zooming around. A friend of mine at the time had a police scanner. You know, Nantucket is scanner nation. Had said they're looking for this woman who was a doctor. So you had a sense of things were building, you know, this midwinter mystery going on.
I was the relief dispatcher, overnight dispatcher for the PD, and I'd go in at midnight, and 8 o'clock I'd be out of there. And in those days, there wasn't a whole lot going on, especially in the winter. Like, well, you asked the question about the press calling. I think it was 7 o'clock the phone would start ringing, and the press would ask any information on this disappearance. But every day I worked, that happened.
I got a call from the police department, asked me if I would do a little search from the air. And it was very cold that day, I remember, and we took off from the Nantucket airport, and we did many turns around the area, which we didn't see much. There was some clear areas in it, you know, but most of it was thick scrub oak. We would have seen it, especially if it was like a colored whatever, we would see it. You'd be able to see it very easy.
The reporters working with Chief Hunter checked the flight paths of every plane leaving Nantucket, Hyannis, Worcester, and Toronto the day of the disappearance and find nothing unaccounted for.
The police were checking the airport for any chartered flights, like for a small airplane. Back then, there was no GPS, there was nothing. Nobody's tracking anything back then. And Otis's radar we didn't have the radar back here then. I heard that there was one came in and went out, because that's another way she could have gotten off island without any, everybody seeing her, if that happened, but I have no idea. But I just heard that.
So we went out on the frozen ice to kind of play with the dogs, and I just walked near some cattail stubble sticking up and noticed her stuff just sitting there all by itself, like it had just been set down an hour before. Was a pair of sandals, a passport, and a wallet. They were focused mainly on the fact that we had found things that nobody else had found before, and that they thought that that was the center of an area where she might be found if she had frozen to death there. So the search widened out continuously from that area.
The Nantucket Police Department did an immediate search, and that was within an hour of when she was reported missing. But 8 days later, after what appeared to be a vigorous search, at least twice, maybe even 3 times, and evidence was found after that, that would lead me to some suspicion.
A size 16 long-sleeved woman's brown blouse is found under some shrubs 150 yards away from her other belongings. On February 8th, Captain Resendiz and town prosecutor Robert Mooney meet Leo at Margaret's apartment on 33rd Street in Manhattan. They find blouses that are the same size, brand, and style as the one found under the bush. There were 2 partially packed suitcases in the apartment, as if she had been planning to travel and then decided against it. They also met with her work colleagues, who described her as a dedicated worker and said that she had been in such a good mood when she left New York they could not believe that she would have killed herself. The police again search Margaret's home. There's no sign of any struggle at the house, and 2 cadaver dogs are brought in from the Cape to search for blood. The dogs focus on the sink and one wall and the adjacent floor in the living room of her house. Blood is found, but not in enough quantities in any one place to be of concern.
And we're talking about blood on the floor and blood on the wall. I can't explain blood on the wall. I just can't come up with any kind of conclusion. As far as the floor goes, there could be numerous ways that blood could be there. We don't even know that that blood belonged to her. DNA wasn't a concept until about 1986. Now, in today's society, we have CODIS, which is a database for DNA. If there's already an existing sample there, it would be matched.
Local news reports that Leo's lawyer has been in contact with the NPD, reiterating his belief that his sister died by suicide and the department is making a spectacle of her death. Chief Hunter wants Leo to come back to Nantucket for more questioning, and Hunter feels that Leo is not cooperating and is overly anxious to have his sister declared dead. Leo agrees to provide dental and phone records, but declines to return to Nantucket to be interviewed for a second time. Leo suggests that Hunter is only claiming that she ran away for publicity. In May of 1980, her research partner, Dr. Zimmerman, presents the findings from their joint paper at the conference in New Orleans. The research is deemed good, but not anywhere near Nobel Prize worthy. Margaret does not appear. Eight years after Margaret vanishes, Leo petitions to have his sister declared legally dead over the objections of Chief Hunter. Leo was the sole beneficiary of her estate, including the house in Tom Nevers.
Investigators want to know the last person that saw a victim. In this case, it was her brother, but there were also 2 other people that saw her. In criminal justice, there's something called a crime triangle. You need 3 parts of that crime triangle in order to have a crime. The first part is the victim. We have a victim. The second part is the motivated offender. What would it be to gain for Leo to commit a crime like this? Although his sister was extremely successful, It appears from everything that I reviewed that Leo was equally as successful. I think it would be careless to make a suggestion as to what was in his mind at the time. He knows his sister is missing. That has to be traumatic. During this particular time, 1980, a lot of people didn't talk about things like suicide. We just didn't talk about it. We certainly didn't talk a lot about mental health issues. So Leo was constantly being reminded about the death of his sister. It may be something that he wanted really just to be put away and not to have to revisit that.
A woman in Quincy, Mass. calls the NPD reporting that her new tenant is acting suspicious and she thinks the woman might be Margaret. Captain Resendiz and Mooney show a picture around and 15 neighbors identify her as the tenant. The woman would not allow police in the apartment, but they say from the brief glimpse of her that she was too short to be Margaret and that she didn't sound like her. About 10 years after Margaret disappeared, the NPD received a call from a man with a deep voice refusing to identify himself, who said check the septic system. An excavator was brought in to dig it up. Nothing is found.
It's worth remembering that there was a Channel 3 mini documentary at the time, and George Resendiz said, I think she went into the water.
Everybody is trying to figure out what kind of state of mind Margaret is in, because of course this would give clues about, was she suicidal? What happened to her? Could it have been that somebody was truly after her research, and was she in some kind of danger? So everyone wants to know what her state of mind is, and many people are interviewed. Her colleagues made mention of the fact that she had distinct plans to return to the department. Somebody had written a prescription for her for some topical ointment that she was using that she hadn't picked up. Another person referenced that her ID card, that she made sure to take it because the nurses were on strike and she wanted to get back into the department when she returned from Nantucket. But all of those things and the ebullience that the colleagues report about Margaret, I think it's important for us to realize that when Margaret was at work, she was wearing a certain kind of mantle, a professional mantle. She could not show any chinks in her armor, and I think that she's done it successfully. No one knew that she was on only 2 hours of sleep those last few days. No one knew that she was planning not to fly to Nantucket like she usually did, but that she was driving for the reason that she had a paranoid fantasy that something could befall her in a flight, but that she would be safe on the ground. So there are all kinds of things that show in the transcript that she was really bubbling over, but that she kept it very successfully hidden from her colleagues. When somebody is overstressed, it can really set off somebody's illness. And so it's very hard if you're not a psychiatric expert to understand. She was very close to the edge, and in fact, no one came to save her in time.
There is no bottom line, there's just possibilities. I think if you tied together the fact that she was bipolar, I like the theory that she was on that plane that left early in the morning, that Leo got her out of the public eyes so that he could maybe get her sorted out.
When I heard the next day that there was a charter flight that left early the next day, that's only hearsay now, but that would make sense. He had the time to get her out of here, just saying, in theory. And who had access to this passport? Somebody that lived in that house had access to that passport. Her brother, or a third party. And why did it show up a week later? And if it was cold, and I'm sure it had snowed or rained maybe that week, everything was dry as a bone. So it doesn't make sense. It's a put-up deal, in my book.
Why would you take your wallet, your passport, your savings bank book? Why would you even take that out and then just leave it somewhere? That doesn't sound suicidal to me, especially 8 days later after at least 3 searches have been conducted. That's not plausible. The information I have and the data and the research that I did, roughly 1% of our population who commits suicide does so by drowning. You have to remember, this is a physician. She is well aware of what's going to happen if she does go into the ocean. That being said, there's that fight or flight syndrome that has to kick in. This is a woman who was trained to save lives, not to end them.
Judgment really goes when psychosis is boiling over. One isn't in sub-zero weather. One is wherever one is in one's mind. One might not even feel cold, and one might even jump into the ocean because God said so, and because this is what is best for her research, herself, her family. Who knows? We can't possibly know because the rational mind is gone.
Looking at this case, is there enough evidence to support a murder case? There's not enough evidence to support it or eliminate that. The Nantucket Police Department did an amazing job, but I think there were some quick decisions within a day of saying that this was a suicide by the brother, by 3 other police officers, by a psychologist. And I think perhaps some additional time could have gone by and a deeper investigation before they made a definitive response to the causality of her missing. There are a lot of questions that need answers, and we simply don't have enough information to come up with what those answers are.
The case file at the Nantucket Police Department is a series of folders and paper binders with handwritten notes and typewritten reports. It disappeared from the department for decades and has only recently made its way back. The investigation into the disappearance of Dr. Margaret Kilcoyne officially ended on July 13, 1999, when she was declared deceased, more than 19 years after she vanished.